It's Monday, January 26th, 2026. It's Minnesota, always Minnesota. Next on the AM Update.
Oh, what the They killed him? Did they kill that guy?
A U.S. Border Patrol agent fatally shot an armed man in Minneapolis on Saturday who the Department of Homeland Security said looked like he was about to massacre law enforcement. The incident happened just 17 days after an Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent shot and killed Renee Good, who had hit the agent with her vehicle. Alex Pretty is the name of the man who was shot by Immigration and Customs Enforcement over the weekend. That is what we're being told is the story. Here is the real story. The progressive political machine is in full swing right now, operating at a very hard enforced level. What they are doing, and what we have seen them do in Minnesota, is organize and conspire with the media, both their politicians and their orcs on the ground. They then agitate, they then disrupt, they then incite, they then gum up the works, they sow chaos, and now we're seeing them exploit all of these incidents in Minnesota that result from the chaos that they sowed. And then they weaponize that, preying on people's empathy, mostly Christians, I would add, in order to change and foment a certain narrative. In this case, the narrative is that immigration enforcement is bad in a country. Borders are bad. That's the entire narrative. So yes, a man was killed in Minneapolis over the weekend. That is tragic in its own right. But the real story here is that leaders, the evil leaders in Minnesota, and again, I'm struggling not to have a visceral hatred for the Twin Cities right now, because I've got friends. I used to live there. I've got friends still living in the Twin Cities who worked for parachurch organizations who are just completely and utterly gobbling up every single narrative that's coming out of this. And what am I talking about when I talk about the evil leaders in Minnesota? The evil leaders in the Twin Cities? Governor Tim Walz, just over the weekend, barely the body was cold when he posted this. I just spoke to the White House after another horrific shooting by federal agents this morning. Minnesota has had it. This is sickening. The president must end this operation, pull the thousands of violent, untrained officers out of Minnesota now. Where's the evidence that these are violent and untrained officers? Beyond the fact that you're paid, probably in some cases, but nevertheless very dedicated communist orcs keep on trying to agitate and incite and are provoking a response because they're putting the lives of federal agents in danger. Where is your evidence, Governor Tim Walz, that these are violent, untrained officers? The body was barely cold when he posted that over the weekend. In addition, people like Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan saying things like this at the outset of Trump's deportation program.
Our neighbors are being disappeared. P.S. Without due process, it is just called kidnapping. Then show up and use your voice. Put your body on the line.
Put your body on the line, the Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota says. Two examples right off the top of my head. These are evil, evil people running the state of Minnesota. Evil people that infest the Twin Cities. Now, they're not all, I'm not saying every single person in the Twin Cities is evil, but that city is infested with anti-God ideology. And that's what we're seeing here. It's chaos. As you can imagine, quickly, a riot formed in the aftermath of that shooting over the weekend. What happened in that riot, among other things, another autonomous zone was attempted to be set up. A rioter bit a finger off of a Homeland Security officer, because we all know, history has shown us, the good guys are typically the ones going around deleting digits off of law enforcement by way of incisor, biting fingers off of federal agents. And yet, this is all going by design, according to plan, including this Antifa member in Minnesota who's calling on everybody to take things up a notch.
My name is Kyle. I'm Antifa, and there's so much rage in me that I've had to record this like 15 times trying to get the message out. They f***ed up. Okay? Go watch my other videos. Doesn't matter if you're not here and you're not caught up. You missed the fight. But if you are, it's time to suit up. Boots on the ground. Nicollet and 26th. My house is 4 blocks away. Anywhere between Franklin and Nicollet and 26th and Nicollet. Show up, ready to go. Okay, not talking about peaceful protests anymore. We're not talking about having polite conversations anymore. I am talking specifically to my followers. This is everything I have talked about, and this is exactly what I said was going to happen. This is exactly what I said was going to come when we didn't go and march on Whipple with guns. Sorry, but welcome to America 2026, where Second Amendment is the only thing that's going to keep you protected from literal Nazi gunmen that are killing innocent people in the street with impunity.
So there's Antifa in the Twin Cities telling his audience to show up, harass immigration and customs enforcement officers with guns. Not to worry, though. Attorney General Pam Bondi is all over this.
Rape, homicide, manslaughter. That's who they're trying to protect in Minnesota. I do not understand these people. We sent Governor Walz a very strong letter today. We had been working on this letter. We got it out saying that he better support President Trump. He better support the men and women in law enforcement, because if he doesn't, we are.
Oh, goody. Another strongly worded letter. Listen, I do not care, and neither should you, whether or not Alex Pretty was unarmed when he was shot. And it doesn't matter. It's immaterial. He should have never been there. He knew what he was doing. He intentionally woke up on Saturday morning, intentionally went to where this network of Democrats, and that's another story that went down over the weekend. There's a vast, vast encrypted network of activists and communist orcs in the Twin Cities. He intentionally showed up to where he knew intentionally immigration officers would be. He intentionally intervened. He intentionally interfered. He did all of this of his own volition, and he was armed. He intentionally armed himself. I don't care if he was unarmed when he was shot. If you're trying to parse the video, it's immaterial. Stop. It doesn't matter. This is a proxy fight for a larger war, and I want to talk about that later. But first, kind of an ancillary topic, moving on. It sounds like the government is probably going to get shut down again. Chuck Schumer says Democrats will not advance a funding bill with funding for the Department of Homeland Security. That news dropped over the weekend. He said, quote, "What's happening in Minnesota is appalling and unacceptable in any American city. Democrats sought common sense reforms for the Department of Homeland Security spending bill, but because of Republicans' refusal to stand up to President Trump, the DHS bill is woefully inadequate to rein in the abuses of immigration and customs enforcement." So, translation, Democrats are going to hold the government hostage again. I don't know. We had the longest shutdown in history a few months ago. Everybody survived. I'm fine with them trying to shut down the government once again. President Trump, in the aftermath of Mark Carney, that would be Canada's prime minister, cozying up to China. President Trump released this Truth Social over the weekend, quote, "If Governor Carney," that's his nickname for Mark Carney, governor of Canada, the territory, the American territory of Canada. If Governor Carney thinks he's going to make Canada a drop-off port for China to send goods and products in the United States, he is sorely mistaken. China will eat Canada alive, completely devour it, including the destruction of their businesses, social fabric, and general way of life. If Canada makes a deal with China, it will immediately be hit with a 100% tariff against all Canadian goods and products coming into the USA. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So there is the shot across the bow of Canada. If you get into bed with China, you will be frozen out of the United States. That's a pretty strong warning. Also, Republicans are one step closer to finalizing plans for a midterm convention later this year. The Republican National Committee approved a rule change during its winter meeting on Friday that would allow the party to hold a convention during the midterm election year. So that was something that was rumored to happen late last year. Actually, when it was in the summer when they first started talking about this. Sounds like that's going to happen. I think it's a great idea. Whatever wins you have by summer, you need to have a national showcase for those wins if you are the Republican Party. Nothing's going on in the middle of the summer except for baseball. It's going to be the 250th celebration. There is going to be the World Cup going on. But other than that, you've got a pretty free and clear ride to a national audience if you can do an effective job at articulating the good you've done for the country. When we come back, what's bad is this woman's IQ. Also, a new genre of live entertainment might have been born over the weekend. We'll talk about all that and more coming up next. A quote-unquote woman from St. Paul, Minnesota. She's not from St. Paul. She's a Somalian. Named Nasra Ahmed, 23 years old, says she was held by ICE agents for 2 days unlawfully. Here's what she has to say about being a Somalian.
So I'm Somali. I'm proud to be Somali. To me, being Somali isn't just eating bananas with rice. It's a lot. It's like it's an interesting thing. It's very hard to describe what it means to be Somali and what it means to be American, but it's like a cultural fusion. It's kind of like the bananas and rice. You know, people don't really see, like, you know, it's you know, people don't think, oh, you can eat bananas with rice, but that's what it's like to be Somali and American. It's like that combination of banana and rice, but you're gonna get what I mean.
Nasra Ahmed, well said, except that everybody is dumber. What you just heard was one of the most insanely idiotic things you have ever heard. At no point in Nasra Ahmed, the St. Paul woman, Somalian woman, at no point in her rambling, incoherent screed did anything even resemble a rational thought. Everyone is dumber for having listened to it. May God have mercy on our souls. Being a Somalian is not just about the bananas and rice. It's a lot like bananas and rice. Just utterly devoid of anything resembling intelligence. That's incredible. Incredible. Vice President J.D. Vance went to the March for Life, spoke at the March for Life, including these comments about the choice before the nation when it comes to the issue of baby murder.
I read an article some time ago. It was about classic archaeology, of all things. And one particular piece of information has haunted me. That one of the telltale signs of an ancient brothel in the pagan world was that you'd always find a large number of baby skeletons nearby. A lot of baby skeletons. And those bones predominantly belonged to boys. Because unlike little girls, those boys would be of no use to the future adults who were running those brothels. Now, this is shocking to us because we grew up in a Christian culture and were formed by religious values. Even those of us who aren't particularly faithful, it's a shocking thing to hear. But we have to remember that in the ancient pagan world, discarding children was routine. From the skeletons in brothels to the child sacrifice of the Mayans, the mark of barbarism is that we treat babies like inconveniences to be discarded rather than the blessings to cherish that they are. But the inheritance of our civilization is something else. The fact that, as Scripture tells us, each life is fearfully and wonderfully made by our Creator.
Amen. Vice President J.D. Vance speaking at the March for Life over the weekend. Did we witness the birth of a new genre of live entertainment? I think we might have.
He's done it. Alex Honnold has made history again.
That is the moment where 40-year-old American climber Alex Honnold successfully and on live television completed his climb up the Taipei 101 building in Taipei, Taiwan. He reached the top of the tower in about 95 minutes. The building is 1,667 feet tall, making it the 11th tallest building in the world. He climbed that without any safety devices. It was a free solo climb. If you've seen the documentary Free Solo, this is the same man who scaled, I think it was Yosemite. I can't remember the exact cliff face that he scaled. But this is the same man featured in the documentary Free Solo. He free soloed up the Taipei 101. This was live streamed on Netflix. And I think we may have seen the birth of a new genre of live television. Now, things like this have been done before on live television. Millions of people watched this. I can recall a few instances of live one-off events of, walking a tightrope, things of that nature. But climbing exclusively, I can't recall anything that's been streamed live like this and seen by millions of viewers. I got to think this is a moneymaker for television networks the world over. Should we have the next ambitious climber emerge? Next up, international news. Venezuela's new president, this is a report from The Guardian. Venezuela's new president, Delcy Rodriguez, claims that immediately after Nicolas Maduro was captured, the U.S. military told her she had 15 minutes to decide whether or not she would play ball with the United States, and if the answer was no, that she would be neutralized. According to the story in The Guardian, on speakerphone is Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez. This came up as the communication minister in the immediate aftermath of the seizure of Nicolas Maduro. The communication minister holds up a phone to the acting president, Delcy Rodriguez. She and other members of his cabinet were given 15 minutes to decide whether or not to comply with Washington's demands, or they would, quote, kill us. This comes from a leaked document in Venezuela. Basically, play ball or be neutralized. Seems like the Venezuelans and the cabinet, seems like they're playing ball. And now here's this. Why Minnesota? Why is it always Minnesota? It's a pretty simple answer. But first, before we answer that question, let's go to Chicago, shall we? Chicago, another sanctuary city. A deep blue city in a largely blue state, thanks to that deep blue city, not unlike Minnesota in a lot of ways. Back in October, Chicago's chief of police, Larry Snelling, delivered these remarks. Again, this is a chief of police for a sanctuary, very deep, communist-run city. Larry Snelling, chief of police, listen to this.
Let me make this clear. Federal agents, ICE, HSI, are officers. They are agents of law enforcement. If you box them in with vehicles, it is reasonable for them to believe that they are being ambushed and that this could end in a deadly situation. And it's reasonable for them to use force based on those conditions. Do not box in any law enforcement officer. You are breaking the law when you do that. And you are putting yourself in danger. Following law enforcement agents around. The question is why? What do you plan on doing? It's also reasonable for them to believe that you're eventually going to do harm to them. If you ram any vehicle, especially that one that contains law enforcement agents, and that's any law enforcement, local, state, federal, county, and you do this intentionally, This is considered deadly force. Deadly force is anything that can cause great bodily harm or death. When you plow into a vehicle that contains law enforcement agents, you're using deadly force. And they can use deadly force in response to stop you. We need to be clear about these laws. We cannot become a society where we just decide to take everything in our own hands and start to commit crimes against law enforcement. It is a crime. You may not like what they're doing. I can understand that there's a lot of emotions out there, but that does not mean that you get to commit a crime, especially one that could lead to deadly force. We need to keep everyone safe. Our responsibilities when it comes to federal agents, and I've been asked these questions, we do not interfere with the duties and responsibilities of federal agents.
That is Larry Snelling, chief of Chicago Police, in remarks he gave back in October. That's Chicago, a communist-run machine, a sanctuary city. So why Minnesota? Why is it always Minnesota? Let's talk about that coming up next. So you just heard the chief of police for Chicago counter-signaling anti-ICE activists. Why do we always... Why is it always Minnesota? Whether it's George Floyd or anything else. Why is it always Minnesota? Why isn't it Chicago? You know, in Chicago, they had riots as well in 2020, but they're not facing this large-scale instance upon instance of clashes with immigration officers. Why is it always Minnesota? Well, in Chicago, you at least have a police chief, even if deep down he really is a communist at heart. He at least counter-signals some of the worst impulses of some of the worst people. And that's what you heard him do just there. He counter-signals. He says, no, you're not justified in gumming up the works. You're not justified, so don't do it. There's a reason why you might get killed doing it. That is counter-signaling some of the worst impulses of some of the worst people. In Chicago, at least you have a police chief who can do that. Even if the mayor, Brandon Johnson, will, a very smart man, by the way, he wants you to know, very proud of himself. Even if he might, I don't know, even if he might signal that he's down with the struggle, you at least have a police chief who signals he's not. In Minnesota, what you're witnessing there is a complete and utter, let's just say more precisely, the Twin Cities, because the rest of Minnesota, for the most part, is like Alabama. But in the Twin Cities, for whatever reason, I don't know, it's a mystery to me. I've seen some people speculate that the deep Nordic culture of Minnesota is one of the reasons why they've always been just inherently progressive, a different kind of progressive than California or New York. I don't know what the true reason is, the underpinning reason is, but what I do know is that the reason they are seemingly always front and center is because leftist anti-God impulses, disguised however you want to disguise them, under the veneer of Christianity, under the veneer of communism, anti-God chaotic impulses have hegemony, deep hegemony in the Twin Cities. I'm talking about the governor to the mayor to the orcs on the street. They are all unified. They are all organized. And that's why you see this in Minnesota. It is deeply intentional, deeply intentional. It is deeply anti-God. That's what we're seeing here. We are seeing a well-organized, funded movement of those who hate God. And it has impacted even the church, whose doctrine statements might be fine. I see this myself with old friends from the Twin Cities, just gobbling up this narrative. In any narrative. ICE kidnapped a 5-year-old. Well, did you read the part of the story where his dad abandoned him? So your position is that I should have just let a 5-year-old roam the streets by himself in the cold? That's your narrative, but I see people gobbling this up. Proverbs 17:15 says, "He who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous are both alike an abomination to the Lord." The leadership of the Twin Cities, the leadership of Minnesota, are an abomination to the Lord. Make no mistake about that. And that's why the stakes are what they are. I understand why there is reticence to use the Insurrection Act. That becomes the entire story. If it gets out of hand, President Trump will have, I'm talking like a citywide shutdown of every single activity, economic or otherwise, which we could see. Trump will have no choice but to use the Insurrection Act. But what is not a choice is that this is a fight. There is no pulling out of this. There is no drawdown. You cannot look weak here. As Andrew Beck pointed out over the weekend, if we lose Minneapolis, it proves American government on federal level is effectively defunct and the Trump counter-revolution to the commies revolution has failed. A failure, a surrender in Minneapolis is a failure of the counter-revolution to the communist revolution that has happened in America. What we're saying here is if there's any sort of capitulation, drawdown, surrender, we're saying a state can just facilitate all of the worst fraud, all of the worst trafficking, all of the worst election fraud, and just get away with it. That's what the signal is here. Those are the stakes, no more, no less. I want to go back to the beginning here. The street where Alex Pretty was shot on Saturday. The address, 2614 Nicollet in Minneapolis. Here are some of the businesses listed at that address. Smart Therapy Center, New American Development Center, Nicollet Senior Center. New American Development Center, United Wellness Center, African American Family Services, Millennium Health Services, Bloom Home Health, Global Interpreting Innovations. All of those at one address. And then there's this. That same address is listed. It's listed as being one of the addresses at the epicenter of the Somali daycare and other services fraud investigation. You can't shoot a video of a guy committing suicide by ICE, and in the background in Minneapolis, you can't take a video of that and not be reminded, shown the fraud perpetuated there as well. That is just cosmic. Alex Pretty committed suicide by ICE, and in the background, more evidence, more reminders of the rampant fraud committed by Somalians in Minnesota. This is a civilizational battleground, that city. Those are the stakes. What we cannot do is let the left weaponize our empathy as Christians. It's time to harden your heart just a little bit. That yes, there is an appropriate time for mourning a man, a 37-year-old, I believe he was. That's a tragedy. Yet at the same time, your resolve has to be steeled over and over again. They're trying to break your resolve. They're trying to break President Trump's resolve. They're trying to break the resolve of people like Squish James Comer.
If I were President Trump, I would almost think about, okay, if the mayor and the governor are going to put our ICE officials in harm's way, and there's a chance of losing more, innocent lives or whatever, then maybe go to another city and let the people of Minneapolis decide, do we want to continue to have all of these illegals? Are we going to allow our governor, attorney general, and mayor to get away with this? And I think the people of Minnesota would rebel against their leadership, because it's very clear that a majority of Americans want the criminal illegals apprehended, and that's what ICE is trying to do.
Kentucky Congressman James Comer suggesting, dressed up in a few extra words, that the Trump administration just capitulate and surrender. No. As I said, just to reset this, what the left wants you to believe the real story is Renee Good getting killed, suicide by ICE. What the left wants you to believe in the media, sorry for the redundancy, what they want you to believe is that the real story is Alex Pretty getting shot. Suicide by ICE again, but getting shot. That's not the real story. The real story here is that this is a leftist operation to further the narrative that borders are bad and evil. That's the bottom line here. And the Twin Cities have been a proxy fight for this civilizational, existential war. There is no surrender. There is surrender, though, if you let yourself get your empathy weaponized. Don't let that happen. That's going to do it for a Monday. Back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntyre, and this is the AM Update.